Welcome to Annuities. This is the 100 level course, so it's going to be very basic. There's going to be other videos that go way more into detail, but I want you guys to understand what an annuity is, who to sell it to, the main kinds of it, and what they're solving a problem for, and generally how to set yourself up for an opportunity to get into more fact-finding or to be able to present an opportunity to this client. So this is an important video because it's going to go over all of the basics. So let's just hop right in. What an annuity is just simply taking risk away from consumers and giving it to an insurance company. So I've kind of mentioned the example in a previous video. If your house burns down, you don't want to write that $250,000 check, you want the insurance to. And annuities work like that for investments and retirement accounts. So very specifically, we are either trying to take away market risk or longevity risk. And I'm going to break both of these down because that's really what formats these two main kinds of annuities. There's a couple of levels of depth that we'll go through even in this 100 level video because I really want you to have a good understanding of how to be able to set yourself up for success and set yourself up for opportunities to come when you're talking with folks. And that's the main way to get annuities sold, is really just say, oh, I have an idea for you there, let me come back and show you something. Let me get a couple of details from you. And that's when you do the fact finding. So the two main types of annuities are growth annuities and income annuities. Growth annuities are going to look very similar to this annuity masterclass logo, and it comes from one of these charts. You'll have access to that chart as well. But basically, we are going to say an annuity or an FIA or a growth annuity here is going to be the orange line on that graph, and essentially it just has a guarantee that we can't lose money. You'll get some of the upside here coming up, but depending on the index, which I'll cover here in a second, but you have no downside risk. So you have upside potential and downside protection. And so that's what most of my pieces are labeled, so that clients understand that this is the piece of the puzzle that has safety for them. So growth annuities can do a lot of cool things, and we'll get into a lot of the other annuity details here in a second, but I just want to go over these two main types. So growth annuities have a floor on them, which means if the index that they're invested in goes down in value, year over year, their account value is going to stay the same. So as an example, on this type of graph, we're looking at it, and we say the orange line, let's pretend it's at 100,000, and the market dips, this blue line goes down significantly because of the next pandemic, the next financial crisis, the next president, whatever it ends up being here, the market crashes. Well, your index, even if it crashed with everything along with it, your account value year over year is going to stay the same. And I'll tell you why this is so important is because when you pair this up with distribution strategy, you have a very powerful presentation to the clients, but also a very powerful financial plan for them going forward as well. So if we have an account that's guaranteed not to go down and it only goes up, we have a pretty easy sale on our hands most of the time. Now I want to get into the weeds a little bit and help you understand how growth annuities work. So inside of a growth annuity and inside of all annuities, you're going to have an index. These indexes can be invested in different things. It can be a general index like the S&P 500, it can be a NASDAQ index, or it can be one of a ton of different proprietary indexes that the company that we're using puts out. So we might have the Bank of America Merrill Lynch, we call it the BAML, we might have a Mosaic, we might have a Zebra, we might have all of these different balanced accounts. So there's all of these different indexes in there. And then attached to these different indexes, we either have a participation rate or a cap rate. And sometimes we have both of those on there. In addition to that, there can be a fee and there can be a spread. So let me define all that real quickly. So a participation rate, let's just use an example so we're in the purest form here. You can always rewind this video if you want to learn this quick piece of the puzzle, make a note of where we're at for time. Basically, a participation rate says you are getting this percentage of the actual index. So let's use the S&P 500 as an example. So client invests $100,000. The S&P 500 goes up 40%. We have a really good year, and you're at a 50% participation rate. And this is a one-year product. So it might be a 10-year annuity, but a one-year index. So we'll get into that here in a second on surrender periods and that, but I first want you to understand the internal investments here. So let's talk about the index. The index, we'll call it the S&P 500, we'll call it went up 40%, we're at a 50% participation rate, meaning we're going to get 50% of whatever the index does. Here it did 40, so to our account credit, we're going to credit 20%, or in this case, if we're talking about 100,000, we're going to credit their account $20,000. So now their new high water mark here has gone up to 120,000. If the market crashes next year and loses 40% and the market's close to back to zero, and this would normally in most accounts just go up 40 and down 40 and they'd break even. Here in an FIA on a growth annuity, they went up half the 40, so they went up 20, but they went, if we're talking about a future year and the market crashed here, this orange line, this growth annuity doesn't crash at all. It stays at the highest point that it was locked in at, typically the policy anniversary date. So it's really important for you guys to know when the market is volatile year after year, and it kind of did that here recently in the pandemic if it matched up with people's anniversary date. So in March of 2020, that was a pretty low point for the pandemic. The people that bought in then into these annuities now have a huge gain because 2021 is just doing phenomenally well as compared to of March 2020. And so people are getting huge rates of return on that. Prior to that, they were in the previous year and they lost a ton of money. They wouldn't have gone down with their account value any. So when markets are volatile like this, these growth annuities can be a huge boom because they're going to take the upside, none of the downside, so they're staying even, and then when the market goes up again, they're getting the gains then too. So works out really famously for even sideways markets that do this for a couple of years, and they work for markets that go up. They do protect people huge on the downside, and I'll tell you why that's even more important here coming up on the distribution strategy video. So that is how these growth annuities work. That's how par rates work, or participation rates, is you're just getting a percentage of that index. Again, you don't have to use the S&P 500. You might be able to use a balanced index or some other fund inside there that you like. You get to pick that. You get to have your clients help pick that. You have a lot of control there. You can also split up these indexes for more diversity if you want. And so if some of them have, there was one I was working on the other day, I did a 1 year and a 2 year, and I'll just dive into those details here with you right now. They can have different lengths of time, and the longer length of time before it credits your account, and that account is now locked in at that new highest high water mark essentially. Basically, what happens overall is when you diversify out, you spread out their risk even though the risk was zero. So now you're really trying to lock in even more and more of those gains. So you can spread it out in a 1 year period of time or a 2 year period of time, all within the same maybe 10-year annuity. And annuities can have different lengths of time. You'll find some of them are 5 years, some of them are 10 years, some of them are 14 years out there. And so I'll hop into that here in a second also, but par rates are attached to these 1 year or 2 year or 3 year rates of return for the client. But then also you can do, so I think my most recent client, I did an S&P 500 participation rate on a 1 year and a 2 year. And then I did the Credit Suisse index, and I did a 1 year and a 2 year, and I just allocated 25% to all four of those indexes, and then we've spread out a lot of risk, and we're definitely chasing some high rates of return with that, hopefully. So that's kind of the thinking behind participation rates. And the other side is they could have a cap. And so let's throw participation rates off to the side. Now let's pretend they have a cap. So going back to the same example, we've got 100 grand, the S&P 500 is up 40%. Here we might have a cap of 7, 8, 9, 10%. So here, if the S&P 500 is up 40%, you're going to get whatever the cap is. If it's 10%, you're getting 10% accredited to your account. Of course, next year, if it's down 40%, you don't lose anything, so you're still up to 10 over a 2-year period, whereas most people would have broken even on that 2-year period. So this can work out well for consumers as well. But then the other thing to consider here is if we're in a lower growth environment year over year. Caps can work out better than participation rates, and vice versa, depending on what kind of a year we're in. If we're in huge growth years where we're at 40% and the par rate's 50, and here we're getting 20% credited to the account value on a cap, if we're at 40 growth and 10 on a cap, we're only crediting that portfolio full 10%. And so that's not as great as the other one would have. And so we kind of have to mix and match. Now, if the S&P 500 only goes up 10% and the cap's at 10%, they basically would have been at 100% participation rate. So here it's really important that you're kind of figuring out and doing your due diligence on what you think is going to happen, what you think the client's risk tolerance is, and what they want to happen here for their account as well, and getting all of those details. But when we're talking about participation and cap rates, it's really important that we're picking whatever our gut feeling is on all of that, or whatever the research is that we've shown to be the most accurate. And that's not always what the company illustrates or what this product is going to illustrate on paper. So it may say, well, the par rates performed best over the last 10 years. But if we look at 5 years before today, the cap rate might have performed a little bit better. And so it's not always about what's performed the best recently or in the past. It's about what we think is going to happen in the future. I typically am a big fan of par rates and of the S&P 500, but we need to make sure that we're doing it with a good reputable company that has a high par rate and still the liquidity that we need for the client and all of those details. So that covers participation rates and cap rates. I also want to cover fees and spreads, and then lengths of time and everything else for the annuities. But before we get into that, let me first help you understand the other things surrounding annuities. So in annuities, they can have a fee. There's some growth annuities that have no fee. I love those companies, love those products. Those are by far the easiest to sell. We still get a commission. The consumer still gets a fantastic product, but there are no fees. What I mean by that is, of course, now the company, the annuity company, can take this money, invest in something else, try and get a higher rate of return than they're giving out for this index credit. They get some control there as well on what to do with all of that. But for the client's perspective, no fee. So if they're, and we'll go back to the original example, 100 grand, S&P's up 40, they're at a par rate of 50, now they're at 120 grand. In an investment account, when you're up like that, even if you're with Ed Jones and you're in this, balanced account, 50% stocks, 50% treasury and fixed income, you might only get 20% credited to your account if the market's up 40% anyway. But here at Jones or Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley or whoever, they have their fee on top of here. And so what a fee does is it takes percentage basis of whatever the assets are at the time that the fee is applied, and they subtract it, and the client actually sees their account value dip because of that fee. So on a no-fee growth annuity, it's at 120. There's no fee. That's terrific. On managed accounts or securities or brokerage accounts or mutual funds or stocks or Robinhood, those platforms, you're still going to see, maybe not Robinhood, but TD Ameritrade and Schwab and that sort of stuff, you're still going to see fees, explicit fees that decrease the account value here based on that. And so there are products in growth annuities and FIAs that do have fees. Now typically they do something for the client. So maybe they, by adding a 1% fee or thereabouts 1%, maybe their participation rate jumps. Now you have to do the math on, should we add the fee for that 1%, and does that significantly impact the participation rate over a long period of time? Because now we say over 10 years and it's 1% per year, they're going to get feed 10%. Is that increasing the participation rate enough to justify that fee? And these fees can do some good things, or they can do nothing at all. Some companies just have them exist. On variable annuities, as an example, you do need a securities license to sell variable annuities, but they have an M&E fee, and that's basically just a death benefit fee, and they can be really high. I've sold AXA annuities that were appropriate at the time that had a 3.5% overall fee, that had a 1.25% fee on M&E, mortality and expense. So just outrageously expensive on the fee side of the world for some of these. So some fees are good, some fees are bad, but to take all of that into consideration and do what is best for your client is kind of the goal of understanding those fees. The other thing is spreads. So I want you to think of spreads as a maybe fee. So here basically what happens is we're going to charge a spread. And so this is, and I'm just going to use some numbers here so that we make this super simple for you as a quick example. So a spread is going to say if the market's up, and we'll just use maybe a cap rate so I can try and explain this in real terms for you. The spread is the first 2%, and then the extra on we'll just use a 10% cap here. So the first 2%, that goes to the spread or the fee in this case. And if the market's up 10%, so here you're getting 8. $100,000 goes in, your account's up 10%, but here the spread was 2%, so now your account is credited 8% on that example. So if the market is down, here the spread is not going to apply because you didn't go up. So a spread is only going to apply that dollar amount from the transaction if the market is up. So it works a little bit better than a fee, because a fee, whether the market's up or down, is still going to be taken out. So even if the floor is 0 on a growth annuity and the market went down 10%, their 100 grand is still 100 grand. But if the fee is 1%, now they don't have 100 grand, now they have $99,000. And so it's real important to understand a spread is going to help you out in that situation, but now they might take 2% when it does go up. So again, you have to do the math on, is this going to be worth it for the client? And what does this look like for rates of return over a long period of time? And what do I think is going to happen if I use that type of a spread? So let's hop back into, so now you understand par rates, cap rates, spreads, fees. I want to hop into periods of time for indexes and liquidity. So periods of time in indexes, I've generally seen 1, 2, and 3 year points of time. What that means is, and what this chart shows, is basically a 1 year period of time. So every year they track it. If the market's down, you're at your same money here in year 2. If the market's down again, you're at your same money here in year 3. And when the market finally goes up, now we finally got the growth on this deal. And so if we can understand the important piece of the puzzle for all of that is gaining money and not losing money, this will work out terrifically in distribution strategy. So let's get into these intervals of time in indexes. I've typically seen 1, 2, and 3 year indexes. So when you see this chart, it's generally a 1 year period of time. So if the market's down this first year here, you're back at the same 100,000. It's down the next year, you're back at the same 100,000, and when it goes up, it credits here. This is showing a 1 year period of time, and it locks in here. As you can see, it goes up to this highest point, and when it finally crashes, you're still locked in at that high water mark of whatever dollar amount was there the previous year, which works out terrifically. On an index, when you pick the 2nd and 3rd year options there, if you're doing it for diversity or because there's a higher participation rate, now you have to know that you'll get a higher participation rate. This may illustrate better to the client because now instead of 35%, you're getting 55% of a participation rate of a particular index. Again, maybe the S&P 500, but it's only going to credit the gains every 2 years. So the risk with that is if we have an up year and then a down year and we're back to even by that 2nd year, now because we're only crediting the account every 2 years, there is no gain to credit, unfortunately. Whereas if we had picked a 1 year and the account had gone up and then the market crashed or index crashed and went down, on a 1 year basis, you're still over here. You're at a high water mark over here. But on a 2 year basis, when the market goes up and then it goes down, and your initial starting point is the exact same of where it is, your account was credited nothing. And so there's a little bit more risk in there if over this 1, 2, or 3 year period of time, it comes back down to even. And so even though it'll illustrate great, you got to know 2 things. Basically, that there's a little bit more risk in it, even though it illustrates a little bit better and has a higher rate of return and looks good to the client. But the other thing is, now the client, if you're working with a company that doesn't have a daily average account value value that's shown on their statement. Some of these big companies only tell you every 1, 2, or 3 years based on your index what your account value is at. And so if the client's wanting to check in on these mid-year, 3 months in, or whatever it is, and you're not working with a company like that, you have to say, well, Mr. Client, remember, it only locks it in every 2 or 3 years, whatever index you picked. And so you're not going to see those gains locked in until then. It won't even update on the website of what this is. Now, of course, you can approximate it based on the index dollar amount that you bought on the contract issue date versus where it is today, and your participation rate or cap rate based on those factors. So you can get estimates on that for the client, but essentially you got to know that there's a little bit more risk. The other thing super important for you to understand is liquidity in annuities, and this is the biggest reason why annuities get a bad rap in our industry. So very, very important. Definitely pay attention here. So annuities have a surrender period and a surrender penalty if you take money out during that surrender period. So I want you to understand, a lot of the annuities I sell these days are between 5-year annuities and 14-year, with a lot of them coming in around that 10-year mark, middle mark. So let's just use that as the basis, as the example here. And so on a 10-year annuity, you might have something like, as a surrender fee over the next 10 years, a declining fee of 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, meaning in year 2, if they try to get, or year 1, they try to get some money out, there's a 10% fee to get all their money right back out. So liquidity is a concern here because you don't want these people feed to death. And some companies, some of my less favorite companies, have a super high surrender fee in the first couple of years, and then it trails off. And so you got to really watch that. This is not a standard thing in the industry. Every company and every product is going to be different on this. So we have to do our research to make sure, especially going back to the fact finder, that we've provided enough liquidity to the client so that we're not going to have to worry about this. But I do want you to understand how they work. So, year 2, usually for most companies, you get 10% penalty-free withdrawal. So every year, so you put in the 100 grand. If you took your money right back out and said whoopsie, and you're after the free look period or 30-day window or whatever they give you, and they say, okay, 3 months in, just kidding, I want my 100 grand back, they may only get 90. Or if they're in a really high surrender period contract, they may only get 80,000 back. So you definitely have to watch out for this to make sure that you're doing the right thing for the client. So now, starting year 2, most companies, there's a few of them that have 5%, but most companies, for the large majority, are going to have 10% liquidity starting on year 2 as a penalty-free withdrawal. So you can take out 10% of this 100 grand in year 2 or 3 or any year in the future, no penalty at all. And this is great for clients that plan on using this for RMDs, required minimum distributions, and I'll touch on RMDs in the distribution video as well, so you understand that. But basically, when you take out 3% or 4% for your required minimum distributions, you're not going over the 10% free withdrawal penalty. And so you can say, yeah, I'll take my 3, 4, or 5%, or if I'm really trying to live on 10% of this particular product, I'll take out my 10 grand, no problem. You can also use this as a sales tool year 2, as you come back to these clients and say, hey, I put you in this product, it's performing great, we made you X percentage, but I've got another idea. I've got another idea for this 10%. Basically, we can say the 100 grand has accumulated to 110. Let's pull off that 10 here, and we can, realistically say, based on the cash flow and net worth, that your income is exceeding your expenses in perpetuity, your net worth is only growing, so is your retirement account balances. And so we can say you're not going to run out of money with high confidence over a long period of time with all of the assumptions that we've put in here during our presentation. Now we've accumulated this money, we're growing this money, but you guys aren't going to need this money. I want you to spend more, but as conservative people, you're probably not going to change your lifestyle very much. Even if I recommend you go on more vacations and spend a little bit more, you'll probably end up spending about the same as you always do. And so I want you to think of the next generation and wealth transfer here for a minute. If we put this 10 grand into something like a single premium whole life that is now immediately in a life insurance product, and we put 10 grand in, maybe it's become 15,000 or 18,000, and you never have to pay a premium. It's just this one-time dump in, and whenever you pass away, whether it's next year or 30 years from now, your kids are going to get this money, and it grows with an interest rate, so the longer it's in there, the better it looks. You can do any of the things that you guys want to do there, but that's a really easy presentation to the clients once you've already accounted for all of their cash flow needs and all of their retirement planning needs. This is moving on to wealth transfer, and annuities can do this terrifically and not hurt the net worth of the client over a period of time here. So I want you to understand that those can be sales opportunities, not a dreaded annual review like you might do in some other industries. I want to point out a couple of important things on annuities here yet so that you guys understand the main pieces of the puzzle. So that was all of the details on growth annuities except one, and it's the fun part. So say we sell a 10-year annuity, some of them can have a bonus. And so we can, just as an example, we'll go back to the very first one here. We put 100 grand in. A lot of times these are immediately credited with the bonus. Let's call the bonus 5%. That's a pretty typical bonus. So now that 100 grand just immediately becomes $105,000. It's terrific. Now that 105,000 is growing with interest. Again, if we say the market's up 40%, our S&P is at 50% of that, and so now we're getting 20% credited. Well, actually in this case 21%, because that's that 105 here. I'll show you here in a second. So 20,000, so now it's 21,000, and so now we're saying just by the basis of this 1 year going up 20%, now our account value is at $126,000 year two. It looks really good. The rate of return was obviously fantastic. We got the bonus attached to it, and once that bonus is on there, that is a new higher water mark as well. And so you can see now it'll never be less than that 105,000, and then after that first year it'll never be less than that 126,000 in that example. And so this thing grows pretty quickly because of that, and it even puts zeros or goose eggs in those negative years for most folks. So I really like annuities. I'll go over how to sell these annuities in that second presentation, the 200 level courses, but I want you to have a firm grasp of how these growth annuities work. And so when we are shopping around, and we are independent brokers in this area, which you will be, essentially we just have the ability to shop around many different insurance companies that sell annuities. There are, like me and other good IMOs, basically allow you to compare illustrated rates from many different companies without actually having to run illustrations. We just put in the basics, name, date of birth, the type of annuity we're looking for, a growth year on a 10-year annuity. Give me your highest illustrated indexes on whatever growth products you have. And it compares all of these different companies, all of these different products, and shows us the rate of return, shows us the actual account value being credited, and then who the top companies are and what the top products are. So I know that seems a little bit complex, but you don't have to do that on 100 companies. There's already quoting software like there is in many other places in the industry. So as an example, Medicare, you can use a Medicare quoting tool and get 20 different companies. You can do this in the annuity space as well, and just pick your top 2, 3, 4, 5 favorites that kind of spread out the different lengths of time and the different types of annuities, growth or income. So that allows you to get pretty detailed and be able to, at any point in the process, figure out what you should be selling, what's good in the market, what has high participation rates, and good account crediting methods. So that's all terrific to know. Also, I want you to know that these things change so frequently, so I'm not mentioning too many specific numbers, just general example scenarios, because these participation rates, these cap rates, these fees, these spreads, and the indexes used, they all change very frequently in this industry. So you might get used to selling a product, but in 2 or 3 or 4 months, it will have changed. The participation rate will have changed, the cap rate will have changed. They might come out with new crediting indexes, they might retire old crediting indexes, they might get rid of products entirely and come out with entirely new lines of products and bonus structures and everything. So while I could give you what I prefer to sell right now, I think it's more appropriate to say we should have one-on-one conversations at the point that you get to figuring out case design for the client when it actually matters, because rates will have changed by then. So that's kind of the details on the growth annuity. I want you to understand income annuities as well. So for the folks that are looking to take out market risk, growth annuities are the most appropriate way to do that, because you may get 50% of the upside on the S&P 500 as an example and 0% of the downside, so you've got that floor. Why I like selling these over, so I'm securities licensed, why I like selling these over moderately balanced accounts and securities that have a blend of mutual funds and fixed income instruments is because most of those, if I put them in a moderate portfolio, they're going to get 50% of the upside but also 50% of the downside. And so if I can put them in a growth FIA and still meet all of their liquidity needs and the fee is zero or reasonable, then they're going to be way better off in something like that. And you won't believe how many TD Ameritrade, Charles Schwab, Ed Jones, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley paperwork I see that are just simply, they're 30%, they're 40%, they're 50% in equities. The rest of their portfolio, and we're talking big portfolios too, $1 million portfolios where we have $500,000 or $600,000 just sitting in cash, getting less than 1%, and the Merrill Lynch guy is charging 1.5% fee to manage it. They're actually going negative 0.5% when that's all in there. If I can give them 50% of the upside, none of the downside, and no fee, we come out way, way stronger when we're doing comparisons. They're not exactly apples to apples, but the clients are going to see the pictures and they're going to see the rates of return. They're going to understand when we are talking conservative or moderate risk tolerance, these growth FIAs really have a good place in the market. So let's hop over to income annuities. Income annuities, okay. So these can be a little bit more complex because now we're not dealing with one number that's being credited to the account value. We're dealing with two. So if you're taking notes, I want you to draw a line in the middle of the piece of paper here and understand kind of the math that happens as I just talk through some of these concepts for you. So an income annuity, we talked about growth annuities and how they take market risk away. And market risk is the up and down of the market. They're taking the downside risk away. Income annuities do that a little bit also, but their main goal is to take longevity risk away. And longevity risk is just simply the clients are worried about living too long. They want a monthly check forever. They might want that monthly check guaranteed to come in every month like Social Security or their pension. And now we're giving them an income annuity that can do the same thing backed by the insurance company offering the annuity. So here we go. Let's just do some quick examples, and then I want you to really understand some of the details with income annuities because these are the ones that probably get the worst rap in the industry for annuities, and it's probably why I sell it the least, but I still sell some because it's still appropriate and suitable for some folks. So every annuity has a place in the market. That's why they're all there. Just like there's final expense. Some people hate it because the cost of insurance is too high, but they have their place in the market for the right people. So these income annuities, same thing. So let's hop into it. We have an example here. Let's put $100,000 in, but now we're going to do the same thing that a growth annuity does, but we're going to have much lower par rates, much lower caps, and this is going to be accredited to the account value much the same way it happened in the growth annuity. But we're also going to have another number that's separate entirely, and it's going to be on the income base. But before we hop into that, I want you to really understand this longevity risk and why it's appropriate to sell and who to sell it to. So for the people, as an example, that are making $4,500 per month, it's a couple, and now we can say, well, in retirement, you're going to get $1,500 a month on each of your Social Security. That's $3,000 a month. Now you can take money out of this account, and we'll go over this in distribution strategy video, but it's really bad to say the ups and downs of the market. On this blue chart here real quick, if we pull money out of an account when it's down, we're going to really ruin our ability to keep this financial plan alive. So rather than do that, Mr. and Mrs. Client, why don't I take a chunk of your portfolio, whatever the dollar amount ends up being, and I'll guarantee you for the rest of your life that other $1,500. So you know, no matter what comes heck or high water, if this account value goes to zero in the future or whatever happens, you're still going to get your $4,500 a month. You'll be able to meet all of your basic monthly expenses in retirement. Do you want a guarantee that you can't run out of money? And so that's how these income annuities are typically sold, is by clients buying into the fact that they want an income in the future in retirement that's guaranteed, like their pension or Social Security. So that's how to sell these and kind of what that problem solves. Let's hop into the internals here. So I was mentioning it's very similar to the growth, but now we might have much lower pars and caps in there. So let's go with this example here, and we are going to use the same example we've been using. $100,000 goes in, S&P 500 is up 40%, but now our participation rate is not 50. Let's assume it's 25%. So now the account's growing from 100 to 110, still did well, no bonus, nothing else, and that's kind of what the account value looks like here. This account value, unless we're taking money out of the account in a weird way, this account value number isn't going to be the number that we care about for the client's income, their deferred, their future income. What makes up that $1,500 a month that we're trying to add onto their Social Security here. What matters is the benefit base. Every company and product treats these words a little bit differently, but you still have to know that there's two numbers. There's the cash value account number, and then the benefit base, or the income benefit base number as well. So those are the different headings to your sides of your pages here. And on the income side of the world, when we have this benefit base number, it can look really, really attractive to consumers. We can say, oh, you're going to get a 20% bonus. This is guaranteed to go up at least 8% a year for the first 6 years. So not only are we turning this 100 grand into 120 grand, but then that 120 grand is going up at a guaranteed 8%. These numbers can look really, really high in 5 or 6 years to the client. This benefit-based number, this now $150,000 or $170,000 that we've turned it into on a guaranteed basis with no risk, looks real fancy, even though the account value number was credited much, much less. This income-based number can shoot to the moon, and if that is the number that is marketed to the client, or that's what the clients are really understanding out of this, you really have to differentiate what the cash value number is, so what would happen if they surrendered this after the surrender period, etc. But also what this income-based number is. It's not a dollar amount that you can transfer over to Ed Jones. It is very specifically only in this income annuity, and that's the only place that this number actually exists. So I've seen some of them have really high income-based numbers. Now this income-based number is now used on a withdrawal rate, and once the annuity is annuitized or turned on, basically, this income starts, and it typically starts for the client's rest of their life. You can do it on an individual basis, so one person, or you can do it on a joint basis. So if there's a couple, you can guarantee the both of them a check as long as one of them is alive. It's typically what I end up doing on those, is joint. And then basically the second number, the withdrawal rate, matters the most. And again, there are IMOs with quoting tools that say, based on all the factors, with the indexes and the benefit bases and the assumed rates of return on the indexes, and then based all of that on this withdrawal factor, this is what the monthly income would look like for the client based on the ages that you say. So start the annuity at age 50 and then turn on the income at age 65. Here's what all of the monthly dollar amounts look like per product, per carrier. So we can figure out kind of the top companies that we like day and age, in that day and age, very specifically, because we want to make sure that we're doing the best thing for the client, but also know that that previous history is not a guarantee of future results. So the future results, it could have been one of those middle companies that's showing up on that illustrated rate that might be best in the future. So real important there, you're taking all of that into account. I want to do, and I'll show all of this on the screen to you as we're kind of going on the fly, basically what these numbers look like. So we have a big dollar amount as an income benefit base. Now here's the withdrawal factor, and of course this varies by product, by company, but we'll call it 3.5%. And so if we've got 100 grand plus the 20% bonus plus the 8% growth for, let's just call it, we'll do some simple math. So now we're at $160,000 on a guaranteed basis real easily. Now we take this $160,000 number and we turn it into 3.5% of that, and that's annualized. So now divide that by 12, and here we have our monthly income joint annuity for the rest of this couple's lives. And that 3.5 withdrawal factor, it goes up by age. So the longer someone waits to turn it on, the higher the monthly income gets. And so you want to do this earlier on, because if you only have 1 year of deferral, this benefit base won't have grown to this huge dollar amount. So there's an incentive to do this earlier and put the money in earlier so that this benefit base is real huge. And also, the longer you wait, this withdrawal rate percentage is going up. For a lot of times, it's 1 year is 1/10 of 1%. So if you waited one extra year, maybe it's 3.6. And of course, the withdrawal rate is a little bit better on an individual basis because they potentially might not live as long as a couple could. So that's kind of the information on income annuities. They still have all the internals, so they still have par rates, and they have caps, and they have spreads, and they have fees, and all of that's going to be credited to the account value side. But there's this whole other separate side that says, based on everything that we've got in here, we have some higher bonuses, some higher pars, some higher caps, maybe a guaranteed percentage that's being credited on here, and then we're turning that on to a withdrawal rate. So if we're not worried about the liquidity or the clients pulling this money out, we can have bad par rates and cap rates on the account value, but what we need is that benefit base to grow huge and that withdrawal rate to go very, very well. Again, next month in September of 21 here, this video is going to be old. All the rates I'd use are going to be totally different, and rates are changing pretty frequently. You've probably heard of the interest rate being a little bit variable here and volatile. Same with inflation. It is going up here in 2021, just a crazy amount inflation is. And so all of that is going to affect the par rates, the cap rates, the bonuses, the fixed rates, and the withdrawal rates here in the future for these companies. So really important that you put all of those pieces together, really understand how those internals work, but then also how you're selling this product to the client. So if you can show all of that in an illustration and say, okay, so of your guys' million portfolio, I use $200,000 or $250,000 of that. I've recreated $1,500 a month in perpetuity, so now you've got your $4,500 a month. If you lose all the rest of it, it doesn't matter. You've still got enough income to meet all of your expenses forever. We've secured you. Now, with this rest of the piece of the puzzle, we can try some other things. And so we call that paycheck and playcheck. Most people understand when they're employed, they're earning a dollar amount, they're spending most of it. Some of it is discretionary money. I like to use these income annuities to cover all of their necessary expenses up until the point where the rest of it becomes discretionary spending. And then the rest of it, I don't necessarily need to put into income annuities. You can if you want to. You can sell higher dollar amounts. Maybe they are going to try and overspend in retirement if those are the goals that they've expressed to you during the fact finder. And there's a lot of more intricacy with this, and this is just the 100 level course. But I think it's really important that you guys need to know if you need to sell this client on market risk and taking the market risk away, or if you need to sell them on longevity risk and taking the ability to get a monthly guaranteed income on that to sell it that way. Now there's all these different companies, all these different products. The main things are going to be on for the differences of these companies, what they're doing on their participation rates, what they're doing on their cap rates, and what proprietary indexes they're offering. So most of them offer some version of the S&P 500. Some of them have monthly sum indexes, which are great if you're consistently up 1% a month. You can get up to 12% for the year. But if you have one bad month at 5 or 7%, 40%, it takes that 12 down to a much smaller number just by one bad month. So it can decrease all of that pretty quickly. So that's how monthly sum indexes work. There's a lot of different indexes though. And here's my thoughts on proprietary indexes. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not so great. You, as the financial advisor or insurance agent on the deal, have to do a little bit more research. Not that you necessarily have to present every single detailed history of how the index is done to the client, but so that you give them enough understanding of what they're actually in. So the Credit Suisse, as an example, I looked that one up and it was 40% in stocks and equities, and the rest was fixed income. And so now I know that they're only going to get maybe 40% of what the market is doing. The rest of it is just a small percent, but it's guaranteed. And so when I use indexes like that, I have to say, okay, how does that balance with the S&P 500? And so you're just kind of doing math and spreadsheets on what you like the best. I can give you some guidance on what this looks like in today's present terms, because I always do the research on all of this every month. For the main carriers that we work with anyway, the top rated A financial ratings for the most part, good companies that have strong stability and financial records and reports, rated AM Best and all of that stuff. Once we go through all of that, it's okay to explain to the client, here's the numbers, this is why the numbers are, this is what they look like, this is what I project in the future for you guys based on these numbers, and this is kind of what we're looking like for your net worth statement. So that's how you put all of that in there. Again, you usually sell those growth annuities on saying, hey, we can get this invested, we can do pretty well, we can go get some of the upside potential and we are not risking any of the downside. Or we can sell some sort of income annuity and we can say, hey, you're going to get this check for as long as you live. The insurance company has taken that risk away. We've picked out the internals in there, but essentially this income, once you turn it on, it'll last for the rest of your life. Even if that income base or account value code is 0 in there, the contract will keep paying even if everything else is 0. So it's really important to know on those income annuities that the main concept here is you're selling that income. So that's the majority of the info for growth annuities and income annuities. There's more info, but let's tackle that on a one-on-one basis or on some more advanced videos here on the later series of this. I want to chat for a second about some of the other things that I think are important to understand about annuities and selling them. They do have a lot of rules and restrictions, training on these. So, on different product carriers, med, sup, or life insurance, you can just fill out a contract and then fill out an application and you're good to go. Annuities are not the same way. Annuities, almost all of them require that carrier's product training so that they know you understand their product, which is obviously very important. So they're going to have that after contracting. And then some of them have state or NAIC compliance. And so this is coming out on a state-by-state basis. There were a couple of DOL fiduciary rules in the past that might have changed up this industry a little bit, didn't come into fruition. And I'll talk to you about that just for a brief second. Basically, a fiduciary, people will ask you if you're a fiduciary, and what it means is, do you have their best interest in mind, and is that the plan that you're going to present, or are you just going to present the highest commission to you or the only one available to you? That's what they're asking by, are you a fiduciary? And so I am securities licensed, I am a fiduciary legally. For the rest of you guys, I very much understand you're doing ethical business, you're doing a good job at what you're doing, you're adding this to your existing product line, you're going to be the best, most knowledgeable, resourceful person you can on all of this. You're not a licensed fiduciary. You're what I call an ethical or moral fiduciary. You're doing this not because you have to legally, but because you want to do the best thing for them. So you can tell them straight up, while I'm not a securities licensed individual, I don't have fiduciary behind my name, I do have your best interest at heart. And I do work with a plethora of different companies, and I am going to do the research on figuring out what's best for your guys' situation. That's why it was so important for you guys to be open with me, and thank you again for doing that in the initial conversation when we did that fact finder. So that's how you handle that conversation if you're not securities licensed. Basically, you can fit these FIAs into people's portfolios, and there's a couple of different types of clients that are good for these. So I recommend annuities for a number of different reasons, mainly to get safety in a growth annuity, whereas maybe they're in a moderate portfolio or a conservative portfolio that was only getting, and being securities licensed and understanding all of the other companies' asset allocations, they might only give them in an Ed Jones conservative portfolio 20% of the upside and 20% of the downside. But in an FIA, we can give them up to 50% of the upside and none of the downside. So this is a no-brainer for a lot of those folks. But of course, you got to take into liquidity and all of the other concerns that go into this. So once you're doing that, you're at a pretty high level, you understand how to present this and who to present this to. Annuities can be flow and multiple premium. They can also be non-flow and single premium. So it's really important that if you're doing, as an example, I have a client that has a Roth account, and we did it with a great company, great par rate, everything, love the numbers, etc. But this company they accept multiple premiums, but they only do it in the form of a check, and the check has to be over $2,000. So this person wanted to do a $500 a month auto draft to come up with their $6,000 Roth contribution for the year. Can't do that. And so it's really important that, and I'm securities licensed, so I found a workaround for them. But essentially, if you are not securities licensed and you're having to do the best thing for the client, and this is what the client wants is an auto draft, you have to go with a carrier that has auto draft. Not all of them do. Not all of them accept multiple premiums. And of course, you want to get paid on all of the premiums too here. So it's real important that you kind of learn the companies and the products that are good for all of these. Some of the best, highest pars, highest caps, best indexes, that sort of stuff, only accept single premium. So I say that, and that's real important here, because when you're out there, we can transfer 100 grand in or $500,000 into these, but if it's a single premium product, they can't also do $100 a month into this. And so we have to either work with, if they want it all in one account, we either have to work with a company that does both of those and it can be all in one product, or we have to separate it out. Here's one company, one product, here's another company, another product. We've accomplished a goal, we move the money to safety in the transfer, but we're also allowing you to do $100 a month. And so you have to do the research and figure out that piece of the puzzle for the clients as well. So that's super important. I want you to understand their SPIAs. And this is someone that has a bunch of money and looking to turn this into an income annuity and start that income right away. So single premium immediate annuity, that's a SPIA. We'll spell that out here for you. But basically what that is it's not a deferred annuity, so there are no basically indexes or caps or things that matter for you to pick, because it's hopping into a product. We're just going to give them an income. You can figure out the best SPIAs of the day by that rate watch, basically the quoting tool for annuities. And so that's how that works. So there's also multiple premiums and single premiums, so you have to figure out which one's best there. And then there's also immediate and deferred. So immediate ones are going to start right away, especially with the income side of the world. Deferred ones meaning we're going to defer this out a few years because we're going to want some growth on the income base before then. So there are some nuances that you have to kind of pay attention for in that, but it's not too tricky as long as we're doing the right thing by the client. We're figuring out the risk tolerance, time horizon, things of that nature, and other videos that we'll go over. It's real important that you'll do the best thing for the client once you understand all of those pieces to the puzzle. Main thing for today, just understand what this client cares most about: market risk or longevity risk, and we'll take care of that piece of the puzzle for them. And we'll dive deeper in depth on the levels of caps and pars and all of those details. So back to type of clients real briefly. The type of clients that work best for me on the big annuities here, of course you can do the flow annuities is what I call them. Basically it's just multiple premium deferred, typically growth annuity, sometimes income annuity, but basically someone wants to put $100 a month away, they're 20, they want to do this until they're 60, and what's that going to get them? So obviously we can just use illustration tools to be able to figure that out. run some pars and rates, and get the details behind that, and that's pretty helpful for those folks. The other kind is the big transfers, the stuff that we've got a portfolio, it's an old 401k, or it was with Ed Jones and we want to move some of it to safety, etc., and now we're moving hundreds of thousands of dollars into these annuities. So the range I look for on the flow stuff is usually 20s and 30s. They're great for putting contributions into this. And again, we can do all the tax wrappers, so we can do traditional IRA, Roth IRA, or a non-qualified retirement account, which means we don't have to qualify it in any sort of plan. They're not going to get some of the cool things with those features, but they're also not going to be limited to things like age 59 and a half. They're going to have more liquidity on that. When we have and I'll say this in multiple videos because it is super important, when we position off non-qualified assets, so 100 grand from their checking account, or it was in a brokerage account that wasn't a qualified retirement account over at Ed Jones, and we're moving this in here, they're immediately going to get tax deferral on all of these annuities. And what I mean by that is this 100 grand, if it was just in, I'm securities licensed, so I'm going to use this as an example. If they were just in a mutual fund or a managed portfolio, they got 50% of the upside, 50% of the downside, they're in a moderate account. Here, where they got 10% and 100 grand turned into 120 grand, that 20 grand, they have to pay taxes on that year. If it's a brokerage account, just a non-qualified brokerage account with my securities license. Here in an annuity, there's a huge advantage. That $20,000 gain is tax deferred all the way through the end of the annuity, and then of course we'll talk in some of the advanced cases of how to defer that even longer or do some tax harvesting off of there when appropriate for the client. And so it's real essential to know that if we did this in a brokerage account, or if that's how it's currently done, it's just the Ed Jones guy that was helping them out with this, that 20 grand is increasing their top marginal tax rate. And I'm going to show you a quick chart right here, but basically if they're making 130 grand and this 20 grand they have to claim as income, now they have to claim 20 higher of income, and so it's a big deal. It could bump all of that up to the next tax bracket here. Now you're paying a pretty high percentage on all of that, and so that really matters. If we do it in an annuity, what happens is all of that's tax deferred for way down the road. And so it helps the client out tremendously, especially if we can defer it during their highest earning years. So if I get a 50-year-old, we put 100 grand in, and we defer it. Now at 65, when he retires, his $100,000 salary goes to $30,000 or $40,000 between Social Security and pension. Now he was at a $100,000 tax bracket, now he's at a $40,000 tax bracket. So now when he harvests the money, not only did I defer it and get him out of those huge tax rates, when he takes the money over here in retirement, he's going to pay a very low tax rate at that $40,000 income tax rate plus whatever he wants to take out. And so it's a really, really good thing as a tax strategy for those clients as well. And so we kind of have to keep in mind annuities are a financial planning tool that takes risk away from consumers, but we have to fit it in the financial distribution strategy and knowing the client's liquidity needs and in the client's tax harvesting strategy. So we really have to know 3 pieces of the puzzle that this FIA is fitting into before we make a recommendation. So there is a little bit of complexity, but once you do it a couple of times, it becomes so easy. And so if you work with someone like me, I'll do the first 5 or 10 cases for you. We'll do an app split, and then basically you're on your own, you're getting top level commission as soon as you've earned and learned and mastered this industry. And so that's what I say is partner up or get a mentor or a coach, someone that's able to do this for you. You watch them do it, you understand some of the intricacies, you have someone to go to if you have extra complex questions, and you get someone that has done a lot of this in high volume, so you're working with a real professional. There's many reasons you don't want to work with someone that sells a couple of annuities or someone that's not at the top of their game. They're not going to have the most current research. I see a lot of folks selling these type of annuity courses out there for $800 or $500 or whatever it is, and it's less content than this course, and there's less good quality content in those courses, and I want to give this out to you for free because I want you to understand that we can really make an impact on these folks, and not just their wealth, it's their retirement. It's what they've worked their whole lives to save for. And if we can do that, we can also, impact generational wealth, what's going to the kids and that stuff down the road. So it's real important that you guys understand all of the pieces of the puzzle tonight so that we're doing the right thing for the client. And with that, you'll make more money than you are currently. It'll be a huge blessing to be able to help people with this piece of the puzzle for your financial brokerage as well. So I'm going to end this video. I'll probably tack on to it in the future. I know it was a 100 level course and we went over some of those concepts real quickly, but there's an annuity for just about everybody, because when I go back to figuring out the income gap, and I'll throw a quick picture up here for you. The income gap says most people are going to get their guaranteed lifetime income stream, Social Security or pension, at way less than they were earning in employment. And so we're going to have to fill that gap. If we can fill it with a growth annuity and take market risk away, great. If we can fill it with, an income annuity and take longevity risk away, okay, great. However we do it, we need to fill it. Okay, and just a couple of quick other less important details, but details all the same that you should understand about annuities, because I want you to get the full scope in this 101 course. There are other kinds of annuities rather than these income and growth annuities that I've been harping on. Those are, for me, the most frequently sold. There are a couple of other types of annuities and a couple other purposes for annuities. Again, they're just a financial planning tool, and you'll run into some folks with hesitations, and I'll cover some hesitations here with you as well. So I want you to understand other types of annuities. They're not necessarily totally different. They are just variations of what we've already talked about. So there's something called MYGA, multi-year guarantee annuity, and all that is a fixed annuity, not a fixed indexed annuity. So let me break down these types for you real quickly and then help explain MYGAs. So annuities can have a couple of different kinds. So we have the fixed annuity, and that just means there's a straight interest rate. It's a guaranteed interest rate attached to the contract. These work really well in high interest rate environments. Here in 2021, we're at an extremely low interest rate environment. So I'm not a big fan of MYGAs, but they are slightly better than a CD at a bank. They are slightly better than a checking or a savings account at a bank, but they are huge guaranteed contracts because you're just getting that fixed interest rate, whatever the interest rate is. I think we can get around 3% on a 5-year contract, or 2% on some shorter duration contracts. So these are usually 2 to 5 year MYGAs, 2 to 5 year products. Anything else, I really do like the fixed indexed annuity, and so that's going to fit the marketplace very well at the 5-year mark all the way through the 14-year mark. And those are going to be, again, fixed indexed annuities. So these MYGAs, they work in the place where we know we're retiring in 2 years, we're ultra conservative, we just barely want to keep up with inflation. That's what MYGAs are good for doing, and that's kind of their place in the marketplace. These can be structured where I have 3 years out until retirement. Okay, give me a 3-year MYGA, give me a 5-year fixed indexed annuity, and then give me some 5 or 10 years, something out a little bit further with a little bit higher risk tolerance. That's going to fit into our bucket strategy, and of course you'll have to watch the bucket strategy video to really understand that. But that's how these MYGAs fit in here. They're the most conservative, shortest duration piece, and they're just that fixed interest. So 2.5% or 3% for 5 years, and that's percent per year, APR, the annual percentage rate. I want you to understand, so those fixed part of it can also be in fixed indexed annuities. I talked to you a minute ago about the S&P 500 and some of the other proprietary indexes as well, trying to chase some of the better rates of return in the FIAs, fixed indexed annuities. Inside of there, they also usually have a fixed or a guaranteed account. It'll pay less, it'll kind of pay like a MYGA, so a 2 or a 3%, but it's a guaranteed interest rate. And so here's my thinking. If we get to change these indexes every year on their anniversary, and we have a good feeling the S&P 500 is going to be up a good amount for whatever reason, then we can be in that participation rate for that in a FIA. Outside of that, if we know, oh, my policy anniversary is coming up, I've heard about the second wave of this pandemic, I'm real scared that the economy is going to collapse, and I don't just want to settle for zero if I have a good feeling the S&P is going to be down over the next year, and I don't just want to goose egg on my contract to zero or keep my money the same. I want a little bit of rate of return. Now, for that particular year, I can move my index and say, I'm not in the S&P 500 anymore, now I'm over to this fixed interest rate that is only 2 or 3%, not a good interest rate, but better than a goose egg. And so you can time the market a little bit, not that I recommend you do that, but if you have these insights and the contract anniversary times up with all of it, it can work out in the client's favor to be able to do that. Or if they become more conservative over time and they're at this fixed index annuity and they've just had 5 or 6 really good years, bull run, and now they're more conservative and they just want to make sure they get a little something this next year, now we can move it over to that fixed side of the FIA. And of course those MIGAs exist as well. If you're out of contract surrender, you can sell a brand new MIGA. So that's those pieces of the puzzle. I do want to talk to you about variable annuities as well. You do need a securities license to be able to sell these, but I want you to have the general information because you may come across this as you're replacing or doing new business on the annuities. So to understand variable annuities, you have to really understand securities products and mutual funds and that sort of stuff. So again, this is just the 100 level course, so I'm going to skip over some of that. But variable annuities have the ability, just like mutual funds, to go up in value and down in value. And so they can have much greater risk tolerance, and you can tailor these mutual funds inside there on a variable basis to these folks' risk tolerance. So they can have much higher rates of return, 30 or 40% rates of return, as compared to a FIA, a fixed indexed annuity. You're probably only going to illustrate between 5 and 10%, somewhere in there. Too much further either side of that and you're kind of on the outlier spectrum. So I want you to understand that these variable annuities exist. They can have the same surrender period, surrender rules, but they can chase a little bit higher rates of return. Some of them you can add a rider to for a fee typically, and so that's how you get to those higher fee products. But they definitely exist in the industry. There's a place in the market for them. Some people want to chase super high rates of return like the 30-40%, and they do want a floor or a guarantee that they can't lose money on it. And so if you add up the M&E fee at 1.25%, which again I'll talk to you here about in a second, because death benefit is one last piece of the puzzle I want to chat with you about here in a second also. But that M&E fee, then you have the internal fund fee, so the mutual fund fee, and then you have either an income rider and sometimes both, so that can be a fee, and then you have either like a market stabilization option or a floor or whatever they call it. So these fees, when you add them all up, they could be 3.5%. So these variable annuities are typically a little bit more aggressive, take on a little bit more risk. Sometimes they are higher fees than the FIAs at no fee, which is where I like to sell those, or maybe 1% fee. So that's kind of the difference. So know that they exist. Same rules are going to apply. So if it's in the second year of this contract, you're probably not replacing a variable annuity, surrender periods too high, etc. To do that. And companies have rules and requirements to be able to switch out of there. There are working with securities license folks, some workarounds to do the best thing for the client, but also get stuff done that kind of works around some of the outside rules that annuity companies have in compliance and suitability. So work with an expert when you're working with replacements, because it matters very significantly that we're doing better for the client, not putting them in a worse position since they're already in some sort of contract. We don't want to just make them pay surrender fees or that sort of stuff if they don't need to, or if they're going to outperform it in their current contract. So know that that's a big thing. Death benefit is where a big piece of the puzzle comes in sometimes. So again, these are kind of non-important issues, but it's important for you to have that general knowledge as well. So death benefits are typically on a growth annuity basically what it's grown to, the accumulation value that it's grown to, minus anything that was taken out. So basically kind of what you'd assume, the money grew to this, I took out this much, this is where it's at, okay, you pass away, the same dollar amount is going to the beneficiary. Typically, that's how those products work, and so I don't have to get into the weeds because most consumers are going to understand how that works naturally. The income annuities, very specifically, you have to understand their death benefit model a little bit better. If you have annuitized a contract and you've done it on a life-only basis, a one life-only basis, upon that person's passing, no matter if there was account balance in there and this sort of stuff, you could, as a beneficiary, receive zero. And so it's real important that you pick the right structure if you're going to annuitize the contract. In these growth annuities, I typically don't annuitize the contract, so that's not generally a fear that me or my clients have, but I do want you to know that it exists in the industry. If you're doing an income for life and the client started and it's only on one of the clients, the annuitization on a single life only, and the client passes away a year or two, you lost all your money. And so it's real important that you're either doing some sort of joint life if the spouse is going to need some of that money, or just doing the appropriate thing. There's period certain, so there's like 10-year period certain where it has to pay out at least 10 years. So if you pass away in year 2, it's still got to pay years 3 through 10 on there. And there's a bunch of these different annuitization structured settlements that work like that. So know that all of that exists, but know that it's not going to come up in your practice or my practice very often. There's also a couple of companies that do this, and it works out for older ages. So some people wanting to buy life insurance but can't qualify because they're either too old, too unhealthy, etc. Annuities can have riders and features on them that really enhance a death benefit model, and if the contract was never annuitized and this then just grew and grew, it can have the accumulation value grow from 100 to 150 over a period of time, but the death benefit might be at 175 or 200,000. So there can be special features to really ramp up a death benefit that is on top of whatever the account grew to. And so these can be used to replace life insurance and really grow some extra death benefit for folks that need that. Now, there's cons to that as well, meaning the accumulation is not going to be the highest, the participation and the cap rates might be a little bit lower, and so you're giving up maybe some of your ability to take this as the consumer for the benefit of giving this to the kids down the line as the death benefit. So there's always some sort of trade-off. That's why you got to work with an expert. That's why you got to understand all the pieces of the puzzle and what your product is specifically doing as we're involving this as the solution for the consumer's product in there. So death benefit, kind of take note of that. Again, not something that you'll run across or have to go over a ton in your practice or my practice. I just want you to be aware of it. Okay, 2 quick things here, and then I think we have covered the 100 level course for annuities. So thanks for hanging in there. I know it's a bit of a long video at this point. The other thing I want to chat with you about is long-term care, and not traditional long-term care insurance or the need for long-term care. I'll cover all of that in another video. So if you don't know what long-term care is, definitely please watch that video before you watch this portion. And I just want you to know that it exists. I'll go into detail in the 300 or 400 level courses with us to figure out what's right and what's most appropriate for folks. I just want you to know it exists. So if you understand the problem with long-term care, which in its simplest form is home health care, assisted living facility, and nursing home, basically the costs of these are pretty darn high. And so if you don't want to self-pay, if you don't want to self-insure yourself and pay these, $60,000, $70,000 a year nursing home costs, you want an insurance company to pay, you can either buy traditional long-term care insurance and pay a premium, and then when you don't meet 2 of the 6 activities of daily living, the long-term care insurance policy turns on, it'll pay a monthly benefit, yada yada. I bring that up here in annuities because there are specific annuities and the mortality table will factor into this. So their age matters is what I'm saying by mortality table. All that is we buy an annuity. Now we're not trying to, again, there's a trade-off here. We're not trying to get the highest par or cap. We're not trying to get the highest account value. What we care about is setting this money aside and it will either double or 2.5 times or even triple the value in there should this money need to be used for long-term care. So let me just briefly describe that, and we can work in it more detail in the 300 and 400 level courses. So long-term care, let's put $100,000 into this thing. We don't even care about the accumulation value. We're not planning on using this money for retirement dollars. We're planning on using this, if we have to, for long-term care needs. So for the couple that has $1 million, we're going to take $100,000, we'll put it into this LTC, long-term care annuity. Should they need care in the future, this $100,000 might become $300,000 worth of dollars that they can use for their care in assisted living facilities, nursing home, or maybe even some home health care. So got to read the contract, got to understand which pieces of LTC this is going to cover. Some of them have a little bit one-time payout for home improvement and renovations of wheelchair ramp, widening door frames for wheelchairs, etc., etc. The main goal of this, though, is to say I've turned $100,000 into and of course the problem with, let me back up a quick second, the problem with traditional long-term care insurance is you pay a monthly premium, you may pay it from age 60 to age 90 at $3,000 per year, 30 grand a decade, 90 grand over the 3 decades here. So now you've paid $90,000 into this traditional long-term care insurance policy, and if you just die and have a heart attack, you don't get to use any long-term care insurance benefits. Your beneficiaries get nothing, you just blew 90 grand. That is traditional long-term care insurance. Here we put the same 90, or let's just call it 100 for easy math if I need to use more realistic numbers here in a second. Essentially, you're taking that 100 grand, and if you pass away, that 100 grand might have grown to 120 or 125 over a long period of time. So this is not a great rate of return for your beneficiaries, but they're going to get that money plus growth. It didn't just vanish to an insurance company. So if you die without using it, boom, this money was a better deal for you than traditional long-term care insurance. Should you need long-term care insurance for the same kind of premium dollars we're talking about here, this 90 or 100 grand, you're going to get about the same monthly benefit should people need long-term care insurance. And so it's real important to say I've turned 100 grand into 300 grand. Should I need it? Should I never need this 100 grand? It was going to go to my kids anyway. Now it's going to go to them with a little bit of growth on it anyway. So that can be a good, easy sale if you understand and have already figured out that these clients need LTC. You've already pitched the idea and the concept of them buying some sort of protection plan so that they don't spend the 60, 70 grand per year for 5 years when they get Alzheimer's or dementia at the end of their life. And again, this LTC thing, it's really for the people to buy it around age 55 or 60 is kind of the best time to buy it. Same with this annuity side. So the traditional LTC side of the insurance, your monthly premium is going to be based on your age and your health, etc. These rates this times 2 or 2.5 or 3, that's all based on age 2. And so if we do it a little bit sooner, they're going to have a little bit better multiplier effect on this LTC annuity. So 100 becomes 300 instead of 100 becomes 200 if they wait too long. So it's all about that mortality table or their age essentially and figuring out if that fits in there. So just kind of remember that that's a concept out there. So if someone brings that up to you or you realize that these clients need long-term care and you're going to present some form of that this option does exist. It's basically, we call it an annuity hybrid. It can do a couple of different things. It can do the guarantee of no loss. It can grow a little bit, and then it can have that double or tripling effect for long-term care needs. So it exists. Again, kind of like MIGAs. I don't sell a whole heck of a lot of them, but for some folks, it's definitely a good idea to have that in their portfolio. I would say for people that have $1 million, some sort of LTC protection is needed because they don't want all that money going to the nursing home or the assisted living facility. They want that money going to their spouse and their kids so that they don't disinherit their family. That's what most consumers want. So keep that in mind. We will talk about some other things in some other videos here, but I did want to talk to you about some of the normal initial hesitations I get when I bring up annuities. And so I don't use the word right away. I talk about concepts concepts right away, and then I'll bring up the word annuity and go over all the pros and cons for folks. And so if I bring up, or if you accidentally bring up the word annuity, people could have bad connotations. They get a little bit of a bad rap on the internet and the media these days because they were misappropriately sold. And I'll tell you how they were misappropriately sold. Basically, it was agents a decade or 2 decades ago going out selling SPIAs, single premium immediate annuities. So these income ones, but basically they start right away. And once it's annuitized, the client basically loses the money. They'll get that monthly check forever, but should they need 20 grand to buy a boat or 40 grand to finish paying off their house down the line, etc., they can't do these. So SPIA's got a bad rap because clients didn't understand, or agents didn't explain well enough, that in a SPIA, in something that you turn into immediate income and it's a guaranteed income for life, you no longer have that bucket of money, that $1 million that you once had. You're just going to get 3 grand a month for the rest of your life for you and Mrs. Client. And so they were misappropriately sold, and then people had put not just, I kind of mentioned this earlier, if we've got 3 grand worth of Social Security and the client's expenses are $4,500, we top them up with that $4,500 or that extra $1,500 in an income annuity. They would put that full $1 million in this and say, I know you're going to have kind of a little bit of extra income, but that's just how the math worked out. Go ahead and enjoy life a little bit. Clients wouldn't understand that they no longer have that $1 million. They now have 3 grand a month. They lost that $1 million to the insurance company because that insurance company took on the risk. I say all that to not scare you away, because that's what agents used to do many, many years ago. I know you're doing the knowledge and education you need by watching this video, so thank you very much. I know you won't do any of that, but that's how they got a bad rap. They were misappropriately sold by agents not doing their due diligence, not making suitable recommendations for folks. So to touch on that, when people have hesitations, they think of low liquidity, bad performance, or high fees. And so those are kind of the things that we have to overcome on some initial hesitations with clients. And so I just want you to understand that there's real easy conversations. Say, those are the annuities of the 1980s, of the 1990s. Here in 2021, everything is vastly different. Interest rates are different, inflation is different, rates of return are different. These fixed indexed annuities haven't existed for even that long of a period of time, and so they're a totally different animal than those single premium immediate annuities of the past. So these can have no fees, high liquidity at 10% per year starting in year 2. They might only be as long as a 5-year contract, and as far as fees go, no fees. So I want you to understand that these growth annuities that I typically sell are a totally different animal, but I do get some people with initial hesitations with that, and you just tell them, look, I will tell you all of the fees that are involved in here, and there are no fees. Or there's a 1% fee or whatever it is, and that's less than you're paying to old Ed Jones across the street already. And so when I compare it, obviously it looks like a better deal when there's no fee or a very minimal fee on there. So just kind of know that if you bring up the word annuity to certain consumers, they're going to have a preemptive, oh my gosh, I've heard bad things, or I was told never to get an annuity, etc., etc. You will have to overcome some of those initial hesitations. So rather than do that and allow them to have those initial hesitations, I bring up these concepts of annuities first, and I ask them questions during the fact finder process of, oh, was your money in the market? Did you lose any out in this big recent market crash during the pandemic of March of last year? Or have you missed out, in some money in 2008 and 9 when there was that big financial crisis? And I give them an opportunity to say, yeah, they don't want that market risk. They don't want that downside. And then I can tell them, well, there is a kind of a product, and it's fairly new and it's doing great. And there's companies that have been doing it for a little while that have, a strong, stable track record of giving you a guarantee that you can't lose money, and also giving you some good upside potential. And so positioning yourself and those thoughts and that word track on that, rather than allowing them to hear, oh, I want to sell you an annuity. They're going to be so turned off by that I want you guys to know and understand you have to present this in a great frame of mind so that they're open to understanding everything that you have during a presentation that'll help them implement this in their plan and actually do good for them. So thanks for watching this last little snippet of video here. I appreciate it. I think those are the main things about annuities that I want you guys to understand. Of course, there's a lot more and there's detail, and these rates and things change, and we'll have to talk about illustrations and how these work in the distribution strategy, tax strategy, and liquidity needs of the clients here in the future on other videos. But that's the main topics that I think are going to be really important for you. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. I'll definitely see you at the top.